So many great games have been played already at the Tata Steel Chess Tournament 2024. In this video I'm going to show you my favorite game from this entire event so far. It's played in round 5 of the Challengers group with the white pieces. World Junior Champion, 16-year-old from France, Grandmaster Maurizzi, playing against Santos Latasa from Spain. And Maurizzi is doing very well in this event so far. He's on 5.5 out of 8 and leading the tournament after 8 rounds. Very good chances to qualify for the Masters group next year. But let's first see what happened in this game against Santos Latasa. It's going to be a very instructive game with a lot of explosive tactical ideas. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and I will guide you through all the ins and outs. 1d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, g3, the Catalan opening. Bishop b4 check, and white blocks the check with the bishop, bishop d2, and now bishop e7. Very standard way of developing here for both sides. Bishop g2, knight bd7, castling kingside. And here there are various ways to play for black. One very logical idea in these structures is to castle kingside, and later on you got to decide how to develop your bishop from c8. Very often moves like c6 and b6 are going to be played. Well, that's actually what we get to see in the game. c6 was played by Santos Latasa, and now very interesting moment as most people here continue with a move like queen c2 with the idea to get the rook to d1 and play in the center with your pieces. White is always having a slightly better, maybe a slightly more pleasant position to play, but black is rock solid. But in the game, Maurizzi comes up with an almost novelty. Has only played once b4. And the move he's gonna play is the move b4. Very original idea, but white is planning to grab space on the queen side to put black under pressure on that side of the board. One of the ideas is that if black is going to take the pawn, then before trying to win it back, white wants to play the move a4, making it harder for black to play the move b5, as that will cause some problems on this diagonal. But very soon moves like queen c2 and knight a3 can be played, and that's maybe slightly better for white. So black didn't want to take on c4, played here the move b6, so the bishop can be developed soon to b7 or maybe even to a6. White played the move a4, and that really discouraged black to place the bishop on a6, as it will run into the move b5. With tempo you're hitting this bishop on a6. So therefore instead black decided here not to place the bishop on a6 but to put the bishop on b7. And what is white really gonna do with these pawns, or is he going to complete its own development first? There are still some pieces on their initial squares which need to be brought into play. But Maurizzi plays very energetically here with the move a5. And a5 is a very interesting idea, as white is planning to play the move a6 to hit this bishop. And understandably that's something you don't want to allow. You could take the pawn on c4 and then we get a very sharp position. White's going to play a6. The pawn is defended by the rook. If the bishop goes back, then white's plan is probably to play the move b5. And then the idea is to open up the diagonal for this bishop to create some pressure against that rook. Well, I think this was still part of Maurizzi's home preparation. It's kind of unusual, very unclear. And who knows what would have happened in that case. But Santos Latasa didn't take the pawn on c4. He played here the move bishop a6. Now it's possible because white cannot really follow up with the move b5, as that square is covered no longer by a pawn on a4. So interesting idea to activate the bishop. But the problem is that now with the move knight e5, white is hitting the pawn on c6, and you gotta do something about that. It should be clear that if you take on e5, white is gonna take back with the pawn, hitting the knight on f6. Now, two possibilities. This was all not played in the game, but it's very important for the understanding of this concept. If the knight goes back to d7, white's plan is here to play the move b5 and destroy the pawn chain. You're hitting the bishop on a6, you're hitting the pawn on c6. If you take on b5, then white is going to take in the other directions. Pawn takes d5 and the center gets opened. White is in really good shape here. While the alternative, instead of going to d7 with a knight, is to put a knight in the center on e4. But after something like bishop e3, this knight is really getting in trouble here. There are plans to play f3 when the knight is almost trapped. If it has to go to g5, well, then there is a move like h4. So things are not simple at all for black. Well, black didn't capture the knight on e5 and decided here to play the move queen c8 to protect the pawn on c6, while the bishop on a6 is also protected. But now white continues with its development. The knight comes into the game, knight c3, which increases the pressure against the pawn on d5. One idea is that if black takes the pawn on c4, well, there is knight takes c4, pawn takes c4, and white continues with the move b5. Tremendous pressure against the pawn on c6 and indirectly also against that rook on a8. Black is in trouble in that case, so black therefore didn't take the pawn on c4. Decided here to take the pawn on b4 with the bishop. Well, if you don't do that, white is really going to consider to play the move b4, b5 with a lot of pressure against the pawns on c6 and d5, and the bishop on g2 is really good. So bishop takes b4, taking the pawn. But now the board is set on fire. White captures on d5 with its knight. If you take the knight, then white is going to take with the bishop on b4, and this bishop prevents the black king from getting out of the center. This bishop is doing really well here. So no time to take with the pawn. If you take first with the bishop on d2, we have an intermediate check. Knight takes f6. G takes f6, hitting the knight on e5. But there is knight takes d7, another intermediate move. And after queen takes d7, it's queen takes d2. And look at this position. White is in really good shape, a lot of pressure. Also the king is not really stable. If you castle, then you got to deal with weaknesses on that side of the board. So white is in really good shape here also. Santos Latasa decided here to take with the knight on d5, with the idea that if you take with the bishop on b4, the knight is able to recapture. So that is not good. But much stronger here is to eliminate the knight first. C takes d5. So you're trying to open up the center. White is even about to take this bishop on b4. So black takes himself. Bishop takes d2. If you take back on d2, it's knight takes e5. You take back, and then e takes d5. And well, this is far from clear. On the next move, black is going to castle. It's anybody's game. But like in the previous number of moves, here you're also not forced to take back. And here again, with the help of an intermediate move, white is able to open up the position with a fantastic piece sacrifice. Knight takes f7, hitting the rook, threatening even to play knight d6 with a knight fork, winning the queen. Black has absolutely no choice but to take the knight with the king. Now, again, intermediate move. You take with your pawn on e6 with check. You're also attacking the knight on d7. Black has to take it. But now it's queen takes d2. And look at this position. White has only one pawn for the knight. But its main compensation is based on the fact that the black king stuck in the center, is not being surrounded by its own pawns. So white has a very simple plan here, trying to activate its strongest pieces and hit the black king. Well, black's position is very difficult anyway. There are a lot of ideas trying to play for mate or to win material back. One line I want to show you is that if you try to bring your bishop into the game, then bishop h3 check is really good. If you go away with the The queen comes into f4. This knight is pinned, cannot move away because that hangs the queen. If you go king to e7, now it's time to take on b6. If you take back, you give another check, hitting the pawn. If the king goes away, now it's time to take on a8, queen takes back, and at the end of the line, the knight on d7 can be taken and black's position is falling apart. Just to give you an idea how vulnerable the black king is, and also that black's pieces are not well coordinated. Well, understandably, Santos Latasa decided here to go back with the king to f7. So that very soon he would probably like to get a knight to f6. But first, it's here the move rook f2 c1 with the plan of taking the pawn on c6 with the rook, because both the bishop and rook are attacking that pawn. Bishop b5 played, black protects the pawn. And now, as I said, if you give a check on f4 for instance, it's knight f6 and black untangles, and well, then you are not sure if this is going to be enough compensation for the piece. But Maurizzi came up with a very clever idea. He wanted to activate the white queen without enabling black to consolidate its position by blocking checks with the knight. So queen a2 is played, very good check. King e7, queen a3, another check. The king goes to f7 again, and now the queen goes to b3, another check. King e7, is this going to be a repetition? How is white going to further strengthen its position? Well, the key move here is d4, d5, as white is further increasing the pressure along the c-file. The c-pawn is pinned, cannot move. It will also hang the bishop on b5. If you move the knight to f6, well then I'm going to take on c6. And that's another very nice pawn. You're hitting the bishop on b5. There's no good way out here for black. If you take on e2, then it's rook e1. And you're going to win the bishop next. So instead of going to f6, here black changed its mind and placed the knight on c5, attacking the queen. But the queen continues. Queen e3 check. King goes to f7, and now it's queen f4. Where are you going with the king? Well, in the game the move king g8 was played, but if you go back to e7 now, then white's plan is to bring another piece, because with just a nice maneuvering we have activated the queen. It's time for another great attacker. Rook a3 with the plan to come with your rook to e3 gives white just a very strong, devastating attack. So king e7 is not good. Black decided to hide with the king in the corner, but that's maybe safe for your king, but practically you're playing without that rook on h8, which is unable to participate. White decided here to take on b6. Very good move, hitting the knight on c5. Black just takes back. And now it's rook takes a8, queen takes a8, pawn takes c6. White is having a very strong passed pawn, which black is not able to eliminate. If you take on c6, well, there's bishop takes, queen takes, and there at the end of the line it's queen b8 check. The king got to go to f7, and then you pick up the rook. White is in full exchange up with an ongoing attack. So no time to take, but what should black do? Well, difficult to say. There's almost no good move. Black played here the move h5 with the plan of getting the rook into the game via h6. If that's possible and you can take the pawn on c6, then black is a piece up. But white is playing very precisely and with very strong threats. c7. Very nice move. You're advancing the pawn and you're attacking the queen with your bishop. Queen c8 played, and now the rook goes to d1 with the plan of coming with the rook to d8, winning the queen thanks to a double attack. So that's a nice, convincing idea. Bishop d7 was played to close the d-file, and black seems to have everything under control. But with the next move, bishop c6, white increases the pressure on the bishop, tries to deflect it. Black cannot really take. If you take on c6, it's rook d8. And thanks to this passed pawn, you're winning the queen, and it's just game over. Therefore, black cannot take. Decided to play here the move rook h6, hitting the bishop. But now, nice tactic here. First, bishop takes d7. The knight has to take back. And how do you finish the game off? Pause the video here 4 seconds, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think of this game. And then you see that rook takes d7 is the killer blow. Very nice idea. Eliminating the defender. If you take with the queen, there's queen c4 check. The king got to go away. And the queen on c4 supports the promotion of the c-pawn. White is a queen versus a rook up. So after the move rook takes d7, Santos Latasa resigned. And this was a very important victory for Maurizzi. As I said, he is in the lead. And let's see in the next couple of rounds if he's able to maintain that lead and ensure qualification for next year's Masters group. Thanks for watching and see you soon again.